Good evening and welcome to the Hamilton Report. I'm Scott J. Hamilton, and today is the 22nd of February 2021. I hope that you are somewhere nice and warm today. Just about anywhere would be warmer than we were this time last week. I know a lot of folks are still struggling with broken pipes and other problems with their homes, and I hope that you're getting things squared away so that you can get back to normal in a way that or at least as much as we know normal to be anymore. This is a good day to be a Democrat in Oklahoma. And I say that because in looking at some of the bills that have been proposed by Republican legislators in this state, any right-thinking, good-hearted person would look at some of this nonsense and just shake their head. And I'm glad that that's not what's happening on the Democratic side. Instead, I'm looking at a whole bunch of bills that are people-centric. It's not about big government. It's not about big business. It's about truly making lives better for Oklahomans. And we're going to take a look at that tonight. But first, I want to contrast that with something that is absolutely horrendous in my way of thinking. This is legislation that was proposed by Senator Jett. This is Senate Bill 803. And this is an act relating to schools, and it provides definitions for things that are prohibited to be taught in public education. In other words, this is a snowflake bill. It means that somebody got their feelings hurt, and they don't want to reckon with the fact that, yes, we have a racist history in this country, and certainly in this state. And so he outlines in this proposed legislation all the things that can and cannot be said in a public school classroom. It's really, it's horrifying because he says that you can't declare that Oklahoma or the nation is a racist place or that we're misogynistic. And we certainly know that is the case, and there's a deep history there. And so to propose legislation that would simply whitewash, and I mean that in the most literal sense of the word, it's more than aggravating. It's infuriating. Worse, he is saying that this is an emergency and that it needs to go into effect right away. Let me tell you, Senator Jett, what an emergency is. An emergency is a family who is staring at bills that they will not be able to pay, that they couldn't pay before this weather storm and certainly can't pay now. An emergency is when Oklahoma's children go to bed hungry at night and wake up hungrier in the morning, not knowing if they're going to find adequate food for the day. Those are emergencies. An emergency is when someone is camping out in front of a liquor store all night long in sub-zero temperatures. Those are emergencies, and those are the things that I wish our Republican legislators could get it through their heads. That's what we should be focusing on. Now, having said that, my guest this evening is someone who will shed light onto the other side of the aisle, someone who has really, truly made her career out of honestly serving Oklahomans. And I'll be interviewing her live in just a moment. But first, I want to show you a brief video that was released today, and I think this will give you a good sense of what we're in store for this legislative session from our Democratic representatives.
My name is Emily Virgin, and I have the distinct honor of being the leader of the Oklahoma House Democratic Caucus. This year begins what will be my last 2-year term in the legislature. In the decade that I've served in the House, I've seen us govern from one crisis to the next. As Oklahomans, we're hampered by our government's inability to adapt to a technological age that's changing not just our state, but the entire globe. We're also failing to adapt to a transforming energy climate. Our current vision fails to look past the horizon, and Oklahoma's future continues to be deprived of the resources needed to face what comes next. The good news is that it doesn't have to be this way. We can change the way we think, the way we govern, the way we lead. We can change to be a government focused not on DC politics or elections in other states, but on the people of Oklahoma. In an effort to provide a solution, the Oklahoma House Democratic Caucus has put forward an Oklahoma-focused agenda that not only answers many of the problems we face today, but also prepares for whatever comes tomorrow. This Oklahoma-focused agenda is the product of conversations we've had with Oklahomans all across the state from diverse backgrounds, but who all have one thing in common. They want a government that works for them. They want a government laser-focused on the problems that affect the auto mechanic in McAllister or the registered nurse working double shifts in Oklahoma City. They want solutions for the wheat farmer in western Oklahoma, as well as the small business owner in Lawton. Over the course of the next week, you'll hear from members of our caucus representing policy groups focused on healthcare, criminal justice reform, the economy, and education. The policies you will hear about are compassionate, smart, and Oklahoma-focused. Now, there will certainly be those who disparage our attempt at meaningful change because of our numbers in the legislature. I will remind those naysayers that whether it's through the legislature or through direct action by the people of Oklahoma, you cannot stop the change that these policies represent. Please visit oklahomafocused.com and tell your local lawmaker that you support the Oklahoma-focused agenda. My name is Emily Virgin.
Emily Virgin, who is the minority leader in the House of Representatives in Oklahoma. Representative Virgin, you and I have known each other a long time, and because we are friends, I'm going to ask your indulgence, and this evening, rather than referring to you by your official title, if I can just call you my friend Emily, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, first of all, I'm delighted that you could spend some time with us this evening. My regular viewers know that this broadcast is usually limited to half an hour. We've committed, though, if we need a little extra time tonight, we're going to take that liberty because there is some really, really good stuff in the legislative priorities that have been outlined by your caucus. We're going to get into those in a moment, but I want to point to something that you said in the video, that our caucus is a small one in terms of the number of people that we have in both the House and the Senate who have D's following their names. But I can't help but be struck by the never-ending work to advance the needs and the issues that are truly important to the average Oklahoman. How is it that you were able to sift and sort through so many bills in order to create these four particular pillars, Emily?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, my friend Scott. It's great to be with you, and I'm so glad that you're doing this show every week to have that line of communication. And one day, maybe I'll come visit the fancy studio that you're in right now.
You're welcome.
So we actually, a couple years ago, decided to break our caucus into expertise areas. And so we have 4 policy groups that have sort of naturally formed based on the top issues that we have in the state. So we have our education group that has a lot of actual educators in it, which we feel is really important. We have a criminal justice reform group who, we have people who've been working in that area for quite some time, attorneys. And we have our healthcare group, people with experience in nonprofits and healthcare and representing their districts. And then we have our jobs in the economy group with people with backgrounds in that area as well. So these were sort of a natural fit. And when we talk about the issues that Oklahomans are facing, they usually fall into one of these buckets. And it's not rocket science to come up with these, but there's a lot that falls under each one of them. And the challenge is narrowing down which policies in each area we want to truly focus on, because there's a lot of work to be done in Oklahoma. And as you said at the beginning, what I'm really proud of is that this legislative agenda takes care of people. It focuses on the people of Oklahoma, the issues that they're facing, and it's a product of conversations that we've had on the doorstep. And so we're really proud to release it today.
Well, and it shows. It shows in the work that you all have done that this is truly reflective of what I hear people saying. And I obviously I don't speak just to Democrats. I hear from other folks, and I even have some Republicans in my family tree. But I do hear their concerns, and so I want to take a quick look. The four areas that Oklahoma focuses on are jobs in the economy, education, criminal justice reform, and healthcare. Now, I think that everybody in the state recognizes that we have issues within each of these categories. But I'd like to kind of take these one at a time, if we could, starting with the jobs and the economy portion of this group, because we know a lot of people lost their jobs because of COVID-19. And many families are still struggling as a result of that. Our economy has forever been held up by fossil fuels. And every time that there's talk about expanding the economy, it seems like the markets rise again and the economy strengthens. And so we lose sight of that.
Right.
So let's take a look. I'm just going to go through these very briefly, and then we'll talk about them one by one. But the jobs in the economy priorities include ending of predatory lending practices, and gosh, we know that those absolutely can destroy families. Increasing the minimum wage. I know that Senator Young has been very, 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 very vocal about that, as well as the House caucus. Expanding paid family leave, reforming the state tax structure to be more equitable, and restore earned income tax credit. Now, the only thing that I can see that anybody would argue with here is reforming the tax structure to be more equitable, because if you are very rich, you don't want any kind of tax reform in this state. Right. You want it exactly as it is, because you're not interested in paying your fair share.
Right.
So let's go back to the top of that list for a moment. Predatory lending is a big deal. You cannot swing a cat with any. Just put on a blindfold, swing a cat, and you will hit a payday loan outfit somewhere very near where you are. They're concentrated more in working class communities. They're certainly focused, they proliferate in minority communities. So tell us what steps are being made to end the lending practices that truly are predatory to Oklahomans.
Yeah, what we want to do with predatory lending practices is truly address the root cause of folks who feel that they have to go to a predatory loan establishment. So talking about creating more micro lending programs through our established banks, because the fact of the matter is a lot of folks do have trouble getting loans. They're living paycheck to paycheck. So we don't want to gloss over the fact that we have a lot of folks who have a need for a service like that, and we want to address why. So that's why these things sort of work in tandem: increasing the minimum wage, paid family leave, access to affordable health care, all those combined with some specific legislation on creating some new lending programs and limiting interest rates will not only decrease the need for those predatory lending establishments, but also address the ones that are there already. Because the fact of the matter is, they are truly predatory. You can tell where they're going to set up. They prey upon our military members, our veterans, and seniors who may not have the knowledge base that we would like for them to have. You know, you go to Lawton around Fort Sill, they're everywhere, and there's a reason for that. So, and then you go to certain neighborhoods where people are struggling more economically, and they're everywhere there. And so it's sort of these things in combination. This is a holistic view of what we can do with our economy.
Even before you said that, I was just by what you said a moment ago, I realized that we, for too long, I think in government, we have pulled things apart instead of looking at legislation as a whole with many pieces and the way that different things can fit together to improve the quality of life, to improve education, levels to, there are so many things that are all dependent on each other. You cannot study if you're hungry in the morning,
Right.
so yeah, these are certainly all tied together. But let's, one of the truly hot button topics, and I swear, if I hear one more person tell me, oh, if we raise the minimum wage, it's going to kill small business. Well, we've already seen with very strong evidence that that is simply not true. It is possible to raise the minimum wage to a living wage while at the same time shoring up small businesses. So speak a bit about where you believe we need to go in terms of the state's minimum wage.
Yeah, I think what we would like to see is a gradual increase. And we recognize that the cost of living in Oklahoma is not the same as it might be on the coast. But the reality is that the cost of living in Oklahoma has increased, just like it has everywhere else in the country. And so we simply don't have the wages to keep up right now. And again, that feeds into all of these other issues that we see. We see people who are working multiple jobs, are not home to assist with their child's education because they're simply trying to put food on the table and keep the lights on. So when I talk about us governing from crisis to crisis, we do that in this building, but a lot of families are living crisis to crisis in Oklahoma.
Oh, yes.
And we have to get away from that because we see it with the trauma that our children face in the education system. We see it in our healthcare outcomes every day. So again, taking these piece by piece is great, but we have to look at them holistically and look at the impact of enacting all of these things together.
In terms of minimum wage, where do you think we'll wind up with raising the minimum wage, and to what level?
Yeah, I think we're flexible on that. We specifically didn't put a whole lot of numbers in this because we want to leave it open to compromise and bipartisanship. Sometimes when you throw out a $15 minimum wage, those across the aisle immediately just shut down and say that we can't do that. So that's why we like to talk about phasing it in and tying it to a year by year staged structure so that we're not making this huge jump all at once.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you because of the pushback. But what I don't understand, and perhaps never will, is how someone who makes considerably more than $15 an hour, many times that number, in fact, can be so adamantly opposed to someone making a living wage. And $15 an hour is a living wage in Oklahoma. It is not extravagance by any means. So right. I just don't understand. Well, I do understand. I guess that's the problem.
Right. When you talk about a $15 per hour minimum wage, you're really talking about $35,000 a year. That's not a whole lot of money in 2021.
No, and we're going to leave that one there. But I'm grateful that you folks are really focusing a very bright light on this because income disparity certainly affects wealth disparity, and that's a critical thing. If you're struggling, like you said, crisis to crisis. You had a pipe break last week. Well, this week the hot water heater goes out. Somebody's not going to take a warm shower for a long time. So I'm grateful that you're looking at that. And let's talk expanding on the family a little more. What are your hopes that will come from expansion of the Family Leave Act?
Yeah, that's another issue that we hear a lot from folks, especially on the doorstep, is that one event, not necessarily because of themselves having a medical crisis, but because of their child, their parent, their spouse, their partner, that they had some sort of crisis that caused that person to have to stay home. And that plunges them into not just medical bankruptcy, but also losing a job because they have to stay home for an extended period of time. And so we see this as sort of a stopgap measure that will ensure that folks who experience these crises, and we all do at some point in our lives, some of us are just in a better career to deal with that, but that folks have the flexibility to be able to take care of these things at home without fear of losing their job and potentially going bankrupt.
And I'm glad you mentioned parents, because so many of us today are caring for aging parents and
children at the same time.
Exactly. So that's a double threat to a family, and that's exciting to me that kind of that level of attention is being paid. I think this is the thing that I find most rewarding in looking at this. And a lot of people don't even know what the earned income tax credit is. Would you talk a little bit about what it is and then why we need to restore it?
Yeah, we sort of go back and forth on putting that on materials because it gets a little bit into the weeds, but we do it because it's a really important policy, and it's something that we used to have in Oklahoma, and then in a tough budget year, the Republicans decided to do away with that tax credit. So this is actually an economic program that was started by President Ronald Reagan, Saint Reagan for those in the Republican Party. And he called it one of the best programs to bring people out of poverty. And it truly does do that. It makes sure that those who are working but don't meet a certain income level, that they get a tax credit that rewards them for work, and that it is refundable. The refundable portion is the part that we did away with. So it sort of acts as a stimulus each year for those folks who are working, they're making wages, but they don't meet that income level to where they're paying into the income tax system. Instead, we're going to give them a refund as a sort of economic incentive, and also as a stimulus for those families to keep a little bit more money in their pockets. So we've been talking about for years to bring that back. It only costs the state about $30 million to bring that back. And when you look at the expenditures that meet that level in our budget, it makes complete sense to prioritize this.
It absolutely does. I mean, the scheme of the state's budget, that's a very, very small number.
Right.
And you mentioned stimulus. It's also a stimulus for the economy, because if people have more money, they're going to spend more money on the things that they need. So it's a win-win within jobs in the economy. And this is actually kind of interesting, because I think this one could also be part of the education pillar, and that's the strengthening of workforce readiness programs and apprenticeships. I'm really grateful that we are moving to a place where we are offering more opportunities for life advancement than simply a college education or the military. When I was 18 years old, those were my options.
Mm-hmm.
But today we have a number of other training programs and efforts. We've got some just wonderful VOTEC opportunities throughout the state.
Exactly.
So let's talk about some of the specifics on how we would strengthen job readiness.
Yeah, so Representative Mickey Dollins from South Oklahoma City is the leader of our Jobs in the Economy policy group. And this is really Mickey's wheelhouse, because he works with a lot of our trade groups and our unions to make sure that they have a pipeline of workers as well. Because as you said, that is something that I think we've unfortunately gotten away from a little bit, is popularizing and talking more about these career opportunities as well, because these are great jobs. And we need to be filling the shoes of those who are leaving those industries. So what Representative Dollins' legislation would do is offer more incentives for those current folks who are in those industries to take on apprenticeships and incentivize them to do that, and also make sure that we're giving information to students about all of the opportunities that they have, that college is one of those paths that they can take. But here are some other really great careers that you can go into through, just like you said, our really world-class career tech system as well.
Yeah, and that's so exciting to me, because for lawmakers to be focusing on providing increased pathways to success Wow, that's a big deal, and I'm appreciative of that. That moves us into the education component, and within the education pillar, the Democrats have determined that the ensuring of safe and healthy environments for our children, keeping public dollars in public schools, making testing meaningful, recruiting and retaining great teachers for every classroom in the state, and increasing charter school oversight. This is this is a very full, a very full agenda here, and I'm certain that it's not without some pretty strong pushback from some corners. Um, I mean, some of these we don't really need to explain a lot. This safe and healthy environments for our students. Um, if anything, the pandemic has shown us some of our real weaknesses in making certain that not just our students, but our faculty and other workers within the school system remain safe and healthy. But what I do want to look at is keeping public dollars in public schools. There's a lot of talk about really siphoning off public school money into other education opportunities. I, for one, am absolutely solidly in the belief that public education is perhaps one of the greatest things in our country today. And it has been so since its founding. But talk about where folks are trying to take the public school money and move it toward.
Yeah, unfortunately, we see this a lot in terms of voucher programs, and we saw it again with the governor taking a lot of his discretionary education money from the CARES Act and sending that to private schools. So there really is a blatant effort to take money that would otherwise go to public schools and send those to pay for private school tuition. And there are a number of different schemes to do this. Sometimes there's straight voucher programs to say you have XYZ number of dollars and you can take that and spend it wherever you want. That traditional form of voucher has a lot of flaws, but number one is that amount of money is very, very rarely going to educate a child at a private school. So you're really just subsidizing those who can already afford to send their kids to private school and leaving a lot of kids behind in a public school system and chipping away at the funding that they have each year. There are also some sort of programs that involve tax credits that try to incentivize folks to give money to these scholarship granting organizations that will provide a voucher for a student, and they'll provide a tax credit for anyone who donates to that scholarship granting organization. So it's sort of a backdoor voucher. They're getting more and more creative, and they're sort of siphoning the money through a couple different sources right now, but the end game really is to get money out of public schools and to private schools. And it is this systematic chipping away of support for our public education system. And that perhaps I think is one of the biggest issues that we'll face this session. It's been a fight for several years now, and we're prepared to fight it again this session.
I'm very glad to hear that. One of the things that I hear frequently from classroom teachers and certainly from students is they spend more time testing than they do learning. And I'm sure that that's somewhat of an exaggeration, but we do know that kids are just tested, it seems like, all school year long. How can we make testing in our schools truly meaningful, not just within the classroom, but certainly for the larger good, so that we have a better understanding of who's learning and who's not, and how we can make changes?
Yeah, this area of policy is one that our education policy group has really worked hard on. And that's one of the biggest things that all of them coming from the classroom said was that there's too much teaching to the test. They don't feel like they get a whole lot out of the test results themselves, that they teach to the test, the kids take the test, and then it's over. And so what we want to do with making testing meaningful is just that, is using those test results to actually do good for our students and our schools, instead of using them in a way that punishes teachers, that punishes students, and that frankly shames certain school sites by slapping a letter grade on them based on their test results. We see that in our A through F report card, that based on test results, we say this school is failing. And that really isn't the message that we want to send about our public education system.
It certainly is not. And one of the things that also appears in this pillar of legislation is the recruitment and retaining of good, high quality teachers in our classrooms across the state. And I love the fact that it's every classroom. You're not suggesting that it's a few or only in big cities, but you're really making it a priority. And I appreciate that so much. Let's move on to the oversight of charter schools, because I know that charter schools, they're spending a lot of money in Oklahoma to raise money. I'm hearing lots and lots of radio ads for them. What kind of oversight that doesn't exist today would you like to see?
Yeah, we simply want everyone to be on the same playing field and everyone to play by the same rules. Unfortunately, that's not the case right now, especially with our online virtual charter schools. Brick and mortar charter schools are a little bit of a different story, but everyone is certainly not playing by the same rules when it comes to attendance, when it comes to admitting every student. We do see discrimination sometimes in who is actually admitted to these schools. So we've got a lot of students who have had disabilities that have not been accepted to these schools, or have been accepted and then not accommodated. That is the beautiful thing about our traditional public schools, is that they take everyone and they meet students where they're at. And so we would like for everyone, again, to just play by those same rules, because it's easy to make a traditional public school look like they're failing when you have completely different rules for them.
It absolutely is, and I love the fact that that some of this proposed legislation would truly equalize the playing field, and I think that's ultra important if we're going to be honest at all about our educational system. Let's move on now to something that is dear to me. We've talked a lot about criminal justice reform on this broadcast, and when we look at what the House Democrats are proposing, they're looking to end the cash bail system, reform mandatory minimum sentences, fully fund courts and district attorneys' offices with general revenue, not fines and fees, and stop dangerous policing practices. Now, I think everybody looking at this would agree that these are all areas that we truly, truly need to focus on. There are also areas that I know we're going to receive pushback on. But right now, Oklahoma, it is, not only do we incarcerate more people by far than anywhere else in the country, and more women than any place on the planet. What we have in a lot of cases is a situation where a person cannot afford to pay their court costs and their fees and their fines, and therefore they go back to jail. And so this is one family, one person at a time. It's destroying Oklahoma families. So I'm going to climb down off that box for just a minute and ask you to speak to, first of all, what is the cash bail system, and why are you proposing that we end it?
Yeah, so the cash bail system is something that really serves to create two systems of justice within our criminal justice system. Say you get arrested for a nonviolent crime, your bail is set, and you either have to post that bail or you have to stay in jail until you go to see a judge and they decide that you can get out awaiting trial or sentencing. So those who can afford it will pretty much immediately bail out based on a cash payment, usually through a bail bonds person. And that's where sort of the sticking point comes in, is that there are people who benefit greatly from this system, and the bail bonds industry is one of them. And so they have taken the system and run with it and played by the rules that have been set up. Unfortunately, that means that people who can't afford to pay their bond in cash or through a bail bonds person, then they have to sit in jail until they're able to see a judge. And that can, especially on weekends, mean several days sitting in jail before you get to talk to anyone. And several days may not seem like a big deal to some, but when you are expected to be at work every day, when you're expected to take care of your children, this can be a huge disruption in your life, cause you to lose your job, cause you to lose custody of kids, or put your spouse in a really tricky position. And so this is just the first step in sending folks down this spiral that then ends with a whole lot of fines and fees on top of the cash bail, that traps people in this debtor's prison. And we know that usually people aren't a whole lot better off after they have interacted with the system. So we'd like to keep that interaction as short as possible. Now, of course, there are folks who should be denied bail if they are a threat to society. This wouldn't change that. This would simply give a judge the discretion to say, instead of requiring a cash bail, that you're going to be out just on your promise to come back. And in states that have enacted this, they haven't seen a bunch of bail jumping. They haven't seen crime go up. They certainly haven't seen violent crime go up. And so it really just makes sense, because right now, like I said, it's the haves and the have-nots when it comes to interacting with the criminal justice system. If you can afford it, you'll do pretty well. But if you can't afford to pay all of these fines and fees in the cash bail, then you are sent down this long downward spiral.
And I'm glad that you pointed out what happens if you're expected to be on your job. And also, if you're supposed to be on your way home to take care of your kids and you don't show up because you're in the county jail somewhere, chances are real good your kids are going to wind up in the system before you even get out of jail. Exactly. So I'm particularly excited about some of this work in criminal justice reform. Talk to us, please, about mandatory minimums. We know that mandatory minimums have disproportionately impacted communities of color and other minority communities. But talk about how you would like to see that reformed and what we can look forward to this session in terms of really total reform of our mandatory minimums.
Yeah, one piece of legislation that I filed that I'm really excited about addresses specifically mandatory minimum sentences for juveniles. And we unfortunately do really poorly when it comes to juveniles in our criminal justice system. We don't recognize on the whole, like other states do, that juveniles really shouldn't be in the adult criminal justice system. And so we try a lot of juveniles as adults in Oklahoma. And we also force a lot of mandatory minimum sentences on juveniles, but also on the population as a whole. And what this really does is take away the discretion of elected judges to look at things on a case-by-case basis. They're forced in statute to say, I don't care that I've sat here and listened to all of these mitigating circumstances that you've given me. I'd like to give you less than 10 years, but this is what the legislature has told me that I have to give you. So we would like to give judges more discretion to deviate from those mandatory minimum sentences, and also in stacking of these sentences. So that was something that State Question 805 attempted to address. There's another bill, since State Question 805 failed, there is a Senate bill that's working its way through right now that would essentially do what State Question 805 tried to do, but in statutory form, not as a change to the Constitution, and will take care of some of those fears that folks had about domestic violence crimes, and sort of takes care of that violent versus non-violent differentiation. And so what we've seen is that one of the big reasons why Oklahoma incarcerates so many people, and most importantly for so much longer than other states, is because of these sentence enhancements or stacking of these charges, and also because of mandatory minimum sentences. So those are two really big points to chip away at our prison population.
Absolutely. And I will tell you that this legislation alone has the potential of positively impacting thousands of Oklahomans and their families. And I'm really excited about that. You also mentioned appropriate funding for courts and DA's offices, because right now they are largely funded by fines and fees. They don't have a general revenue item. I think that one pretty much speaks for itself. I think that's a great idea. But now here we're going to come to one that there's no easy way to talk about this, because anytime you mention police reform, people just draw the line in the sand. They don't even want to talk to each other. In fact, we have got to stop dangerous policing practices in every aspect of government. That means at the county level, at the city level, the state level. We have to make some systemic changes. Now, tell me about the proposed legislation that would look to do that.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of pieces of legislation that touch on this very important topic. Representative Regina Goodwin has been a leader in this area for several years. She has legislation that would do some pretty specific things in terms of police practices. We have Representative Maury Turner, who is trying to codify minimum standards for police across the state, because the standards vary widely. And just because you are a citizen in Oklahoma City where standards are higher doesn't mean that you should be treated better than the police, by the police than someone in a rural area. So Representative Turner is working on that. Representative Monroe Nichols, also of Tulsa, is working on an office of the independent monitor that would be housed within the Attorney General's office to review these police brutality cases, and also make sure that we keep track of those, and that there's some official record of, if there was no action taken, why was there no action taken?
That's great. That is the beginning of some positive change. You're not saying to fund the police, and I need to be real clear about that, because that's one of those war cries that we hear. The Democrats want to defund the police. It's not so much defund as it is refund in funding them, but redoing the ways that we do business within our police forces. So congratulations on that. That's really wonderful. And then one of the other pieces, the last one within this pillar, is so critical. This kind of goes back to jobs in the economy and also touches on education, and that is to enhance and expand opportunities for reentry into society. The days are gone when you could hand someone a quarter and drop them off by a payphone somewhere and expect them to be on with their lives. That's not where we are today, especially for someone who has been incarcerated for some time. There's a whole learning curve that has to happen. So tell us about some of the things that you see that will really improve the quality of community life. And I think that's an important thing to stay here, because if we bring someone back into society and we give them adequate opportunities, that's going to strengthen the home. It's going to strengthen the community.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that the vast majority of folks who enter a prison, the Department of Corrections, they're going to get out at some point. And we want them to get out at a place where they can make a living, where they can be a productive member of society, that they aren't put in a place where they feel like their only option is to reoffend and go back into the correction system. So this is one that takes some political will, and it takes some funding. Unfortunately, a lot of the programs that we used to have in the Department of Corrections have been defunded based on tough budget years and based on ballooning prison populations. they've had to limit who can actually qualify for these educational programs, these certification programs, because they just have so many inmates. And so again, it works in tandem. We've got to chip away at the number of folks who are in our prison system, but also focus on those who are there and making sure that they're successful when they get out. So providing these jobs and training programs, providing educational programs, the opportunity to receive education and come out with a certificate or a bachelor's degree, whatever it is, that you can re-enter and say, all right, I'm ready to go get a job. And also focusing on the mental health piece, the mental health and substance abuse piece, and making sure that however we're treating these conditions in prison, that we are setting you up for success when you leave the incarceration system in terms of medication, in terms of a primary care doctor, making sure that transition is as smooth as possible will benefit everyone. Gosh,
that to me is such a humanitarian approach. Once someone pays their debt to society, why do we make them keep paying over and over and over? And you mentioned as they leave to receive the same kind of treatment that they received while they were incarcerated. And that's a critically important piece. And I want to acknowledge that the House Democrats have done a great job in really thinking that through. And that brings us now to McKenna points out that healthcare is a big issue. It certainly is. Let's take a look at the healthcare pillar here. You are suggesting that we need to increase funding for mental health, substance use, prevention, and treatment services, decrease Oklahoma's high maternal and infant mortality rates, which are among some of the highest in the nation, lower prescription drug prices, and address the rising cost of health care. Oh my! Well, that's
pretty simple, right?
That's a very, very aggressive list of things to tackle. The beautiful thing is that you all are stepping out and saying, "Look, we've got some issues here that we have got to address." I think it's telling that one of the very first things in this pillar is talking about mental health and substance use services, because that, as we know, impacts our education system, that impacts our job and economic system, that also impacts the criminal justice system. And so by addressing increasing funding for mental health resources, that goes a long way to addressing some major issues in our state. And yet, for too long, we've kind of put mental health on the back burner.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that a lot of states were guilty of in sort of defunding the centralized mental health care system, wanted to get away from these large institutions and instead move to community-based services. That was a big push on the national level in the 60s. And we got away from the institutionalizing, but we never really funded the community mental health services. And so that's sort of where we would like to focus is funding these community mental health centers and making sure that people have access in the communities where they live, rather than having to seek some sort of crisis service at a hospital emergency room, or at Griffin and Norman. That there should be better options for those who are not yet in crisis, because right now what we see is you have to wait until you're in crisis to get services. And it really shouldn't be that way. We should want to address it as quickly as possible. But right now, because of the state of just core funding of services across Oklahoma, we only will step up to treat you when you are in a true crisis. And we have to get to the prevention side of things rather than treating the crisis.
Gosh, this is truly heartwarming. I had the privilege of serving on the state's mental health and substance abuse services advisory board, and that was one of the things that we heard over and over and over, is that by the time people sought help, it was often too late.
Hmm.
So this is exciting for a number of reasons, and truly stands to save many lives throughout our state. So congratulations on that. You know, infant mortality, maternal death, those are things that are hard for any family to endure. Um, and part of the problem in Oklahoma is a lack of prenatal health care. And we know
Hmm.
this. We have known this for some time. How do you propose really making a positive impact on the lives of both the mother and the infant child?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things. Number one, like you said, increasing access to prenatal services and making sure that women have access to a primary care doctor throughout their pregnancy, and making sure that any of those issues are brought up before they're actually in the hospital giving birth. And also, an important piece of this that Representative AJ Pittman from Oklahoma City has been working on is ensuring that our providers have implicit bias training, because what we see is that maternal and infant mortality rates are much higher in communities of color, and that there is an implicit bias problem with providers who just don't listen, frankly, as much when it's a woman of color who's coming in and giving birth, or they're not aware of the unique issues that may come up with women of color. And so providing that implicit bias training is something that we're really passionate about, that we see in other states has worked to bring down those mortality rates.
That's wonderful. And that's although I have no children or grandchildren, it's encouraging to me to know that we have legislators with hearts who are really taking this seriously. You know, one of the things that the pandemic has shown us in spades is that we have a problem retaining nurses in Oklahoma. And what you are proposing in this priority is a way of retaining good nurses in our state.
Yeah, so on that point, we have created programs for doctors and for other healthcare providers in the form of income tax credits or other sorts of incentive programs to incentivize them to go to underserved areas. So we've done that with rural healthcare providers. We think that it's time to do something like that for nurses. Right now, our pipeline is pretty thin, and it's an issue, I think, that goes along with a lot of the other ones on this list, that we have to make Oklahoma a good place to live and work. And that living part is really important as well. So that touches on issues of education and criminal justice reform and the economy, but also providing and recognizing that the nursing profession is one that we've got a shortage, and that's nationwide, but we have to attract them to our state and provide them with some sort of incentive to be educated here and stay here.
That's really great because I know that we really were in a tough spot during much of the pandemic, reaching out for nurses from all over the country. So that's really terrific. The last piece in the healthcare pillar here is one that I find astonishing, really, that we have so many food deserts in Oklahoma, and not just in the most rural communities, but even in the biggest cities. That's something that I know in Oklahoma City, years of work have gone into changing that, both at the state and the city level. Councilwoman Nikki Nice has done a yeoman's job in making some changes for Northeast Oklahoma City. But it's time that we really address this throughout our state. How do we go about eliminating what really food desert? Just that's kind of a cute term, but the reality is we're talking about places where you cannot get quality food items, where
Exactly.
you cannot get decent vegetables, for example, or even high quality dairy products. And I'm not saying anything against the chain dollar stores, but that's not a place where most people can or should be doing all their shopping. So how do we effectively eliminate food deserts within our state?
Yeah, it goes along sort of with the first thing we talked about, the predatory lending practices, that we see that businesses will come in and fill this gap when there is a need that's identified. So in some places, you have a dollar store, you have a convenience store, but you don't have an actual grocery store. And a lot of this is sort of a failed policy at the federal level based on what sorts of food they have incentivized and made cheap. But there are some things that we can do on the state level in terms of SNAP benefits that, again, Representative A.J. Pittman has taken the lead on to address a lot of these issues for Northeast Oklahoma City. So, like I said, she's working on legislation that deals with SNAP benefits. And also, again, this is just as much an economic issue as it is a healthcare issue, because once we invest in these communities, we will see private businesses invest, and we'll see those full service grocery stores going to those areas. So as you said, I've loved seeing the work that Councilwoman Nice has put in Northeast Oklahoma City, but we also have to do a better job at the state level of providing that safety net and making sure that that we don't have these areas that are simply left behind by the state.
Absolutely. Well, wow, we've covered a great deal in this almost hour that we've been together this evening. We've talked about jobs and the economy, our education system, meaningful criminal justice reform, and healthcare changes that will positively impact all of Oklahoma's citizens. Emily, this has been only just scratching the surface on everything that you and our Democratic colleagues in the House are doing. But my gosh, what yeoman's work! And I'm really proud of the work you're doing, and I'm proud to be a part of a party, an organization that truly is about keeping the focus on individuals, on people. And so thank you. This is, I need to tell our audience that this is your last term as representative. According to state law, you will be term limiting out this year. But although I've heard lots of wonderful rumors, we're not going to speculate too openly on that tonight. But I do want you to say a couple of words to the folks who are watching tonight, and how we all can help you do your work in the State House of Representatives to create positive change for all of us. Who should we call? Who should we write? What should we do?
Yeah, I think it's important that we start talking about a people-focused agenda. I thought it was fairly ironic that the Republicans are talking about their agenda and calling it the people's agenda when it really is anything but. It focuses on corporations very heavily, focuses on tax breaks for those who don't need it. And the rhetoric that we've seen coming out of the majority party at the Capitol so far this session has been focused on, trying to fight Joe Biden's executive orders, focusing on objecting to the presidential election, talking about irregularities with elections in other states. And so that's why we want to make this contrast of, we are laser focused on the issues that really affect Oklahomans in their daily lives. That's what I think we've gotten way too far away from in this building, is we're getting distracted by shiny objects and trying to act too much like Washington, D.C., when there's real work to do right here on the ground in Oklahoma. And so I hope that folks see that the House Democratic Caucus has really done the work to figure out what would improve the lives of everyday working families and put those onto paper. And we call it the Oklahoma Focused Agenda because it is Oklahoma focused. It's truly focused on what people need. And so I'd encourage everyone to visit oklahomafocused.com and read more about the specific legislation, and contact your legislator and tell them that you support this agenda, that you want the focus to be on the people of Oklahoma, not special interests or corporations, and making sure that we're taking care of the people who are here in Oklahoma, and ask them to support these specific policies.
Before I let you go, there's one thing I need to say, and that is that elected officials and the state party have not always worked hand in hand. And for you to take this much time, especially to be with us this evening, to be with us on the very day that you launch the publicity around the legislative initiatives, the way that you and your office and your colleagues have been and are working with the state party, is not only is it gratifying to me, but it gives me a great sense of hope as we move forward.
Me too.
Because we know that your while your time in the House is limited, you are looking ahead, and we will be looking forward to supporting you in whatever you do. And as people are thinking about running for office now or in the future, I think that the work that you are doing today is making a powerful impact to provide a way of entry into the political process, and to show that this party is truly, as you said, laser focused on the needs of Oklahomans. Emily, you have been so gracious with your time tonight, and I ask that you will come back and see us again before
Absolutely.
the session is over. And as always, you know where to find me. I'm here for anything you need.
Thank you, Scott, and I want to thank Chairwoman Andrews also for her hard work, and it's been truly a pleasure to work with your team at ODP.
I appreciate you saying that. Have a great evening. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.
My guest tonight has been Representative Emily Virgin, the minority leader in the State House of Representatives, and I am so proud of her and her leadership. I cannot tell you the changes that she has made in the atmosphere at the Capitol. And I met Emily when she was in law school. Matter of fact, she was one of the first persons that I met when I moved back to Oklahoma. And we instantly developed a rapport. And I am very proud to say that she is my leader in the State House of Representatives. Well, you folks have been gracious to spend so much time with us this evening. I promised that we'd be a little bit long, and I didn't realize we would go this long, but I hope that what we have done is give you a true sense of the work that's being done on our behalf and on behalf of every Republican and every independent and every unregistered voter in the state. This is not about passing legislation that will enhance life just for Democrats. That's not what Democrats do. And that's certainly not what Leader Virgin does. I want to say one last word in closing, and that is your party, the Oklahoma Democratic Party, needs your support. This program, our training opportunities, our candidate recruitment, everything we do takes resources, and every nickel we raise goes to making certain that we elect more Democrats up and down the ballot in Oklahoma. I hope that you will consider a gift in any amount. And if you would like to make that a monthly gift, even a small one, it really helps us in terms of budgeting, in terms of planning our activities and our programs, and building up a party that will continue to elevate the concerns of well-meaning and right-thinking Oklahomans throughout our state. You can do that anytime, day or night, at okdemocrats.org. On behalf of all of us here at the Hamilton Report, and certainly the Oklahoma Democratic Party, I'm Scott J. Hamilton, thanking you for being with us. I hope that you'll want to share this broadcast with your friends and your family, and that you'll join us here again next Monday evening at 7 o'clock. Until then, don't forget that our chair, Alicia Andrews, every single day, Monday through Friday, hosts a live update. Sometimes they're only a couple of minutes long, and sometimes they're longer. But there you'll find issues of critical importance, like the bill we talked about earlier in this broadcast, things that you need to know to protect yourself and your family. That's right here on YouTube, and also at the Oklahoma Democratic Party Facebook page. So you can catch it either way, live at 4:15 every day, or anytime after that you can always catch up with what she has to say. Look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, enjoy this spring-like weather. Take good care of yourself and each other. And thank you, as always, for being a part of this broadcast. Good night.